Hi, I'm Bruce the Moose, and I, being a denizen of the Dominion of Canada, am going to force you to learn about Canadian history. You see, it used to be that France owned Canada in the 1700s, and the French settlers lived in what is now Quebec. Later, British settlers moved into Ontario. Eventually, Britain gained control of all the territory there in 1763, and the British part, Ontario, became known as Upper Canada, while the French bit, Quebec, was Lower Canada. Upper and Lower Canada were separate British provinces ruled by British governors. All this other stuff wasn't really part of Canada till much later. To understand the next part of Canada's long and noble history, we must go off on a bit of a tangent. At about the year 1800, the Napoleonic War began. This was a rather self-explanatory war in which Napoleon had France attack pretty much the rest of Europe. Britain itself, being an island nation with only a few people compared to the rest of Europe, faced a big problem. It was running out of people who could be sailors. You see, the British Navy was the biggest navy in the world, with close to 750 massive wooden warships. The problem is that each warship needs about 400 people to crew it. Not only that, but the conditions on these ships were awful. Although the ships were huge, 400 was really more than is healthy stuffed onto a ship. So Britain was running out of sailors. Britain decided the only way to get more sailors was to simply find British people, specifically veteran sailors, who had moved to America to escape having to be a sailor in the British Navy, which, for the record, kinda sucked. Unfortunately for Britain, or perhaps fortunately, there really wasn't any method of determining if a person had ever been a sailor, as there was no system for that, like what exists now. So British press gangs, as they were called, would just stop American ships, find anyone who looked British and sailor-y, and force them into being sailors in the British Navy. America, none too happy about this, and still giddy from their success in the Revolutionary War only a few years before, decided it was time to go to war with Britain. However, it's pretty far across the Atlantic Ocean to Britain, and Britain was still pretty much the most powerful nation on the planet, so America decided to go war with their neighboring piece of Britain, Canada, in 1812. This was the War of 1812. This was not really even that much of a war because it was so one-sided. America suffered from the almost comically bad generaling from its generals. The Americans thought that the Canadian population wanted to be American, and would help them as they advanced. In fact, President Jefferson said at one point that the American victory would simply be a matter of marching. As it turned out, the Canadians liked being part of Britain, and so did the Native Americans there, the Iroquois. These American generals kept such bad discipline that the American army, thinking it could easily take Canada, was made up of an unhealthily large number of drunk Americans. Was surprised to find, as his half-drunk militia staggered into Canada, that the Canadians did not in fact hate Britain. Thinking to convince them to join his side, he issued several proclamations. First, to any British subjects in America, he said, "Surrender, or the horrors and calamities of war will stalk before you." Secondly, being racist, he also said that any enemy troops who had been fighting alongside Native Americans, which was all of the enemy troops, would be shot upon being taken prisoner, rather than being traded back in prisoner exchanges, which was normal. Needless to say, this had the opposite of the intended effect upon the Canadians, who started identifying themselves as Canadians as they gained a national identity in the face of a common foe. Later, in 1837, the Canadians started rebelling as they wanted autonomy or self-government. The British Lord Durham submitted the Durham Report to the British Crown, recommending that the two provinces be joined into a single dominion, to be called Canada. A dominion's like its own country, but still sort of expected to follow the advice of its mother country. The Crown finally agreed to this, and Canada became a dominion. These are the lasting effects. Canada is still a dominion of Great Britain, and its technical head of state is still the British monarch, who is currently Queen Elizabeth. Thanks for watching. Now we should be moving on to Bruce the Koala, who's going to talk about Australia.